Good evening and welcome to Somehow Peace. I'm Rod Stafford. I'm the lead pastor here at Portland Mennonite Church, and we're very glad to welcome you to tonight's performance, both those of you who are here in the sanctuary and those who are joining us online. This is the 14th year that Franz and Kathy have brought songs and stories to this annual Christmas event, and we're grateful every year. I'm also grateful that they use this event as an occasion to raise money for Mennonite Central Committee. For 100 years, Mennonite Central Committee has done relief and development and peacemaking work around the world. Currently, they're working in 45 countries where they partner with congregations and local organizations. So in the back, there's a jar by the lift. There's a few MCC calendars, which you're welcome to take as well. At the intermission, there will be some chocolates in the back, too. Is that right? There's no intermission, so afterwards there will be chocolates. All right. I'm not saying you have to give a check to MCC to have a chocolate, but I'm not saying that either. So, but we're grateful for your generosity. So before we begin, the bathrooms, if you're new to this building, are sort of directly below me. So you can go through the doors here or the entryway in the back, but eventually the signs will take you right below me. And I invite everyone to silence your phones or watches or whatever device you brought with you tonight. Again, welcome. And now, Somehow Peace.
Oh, okay. Okay. We'll do it this way. Sinterklaas is relatively thin and slender, long beard, dignified. Of course, he has to be dignified because he became a saint. Santa Claus lives on the North Pole. Sinterklaas lives in Spain. They both give presents. However, Santa Claus is very late. He does it on the 25th, and Sinterklaas gives us presents on the 5th of December. And it is because on the night before his birthday, Sinterklaas, when he was living in Spain, he doled out some presents to the children. And I think because of that, he became a saint. And in the 1600s, the Dutch people thought it would be nice to have a saint in your history, in your culture. So from that moment on, we have Saint Nicholas as a very important figure in the Dutch history. And for the last 700-800 years, we give each other presents in the name of Sinterklaas. Now you might say, doesn't matter whether we have to wait 20 days a little longer for getting our presents, as long as we get the presents, that's important. But that's not the issue. The issue is, how do we give presents? And I hate to say it, Kathy, but I was rather angry and sad and amazed when I celebrated for the first time Christmas here in America. I remember very well, the 25th of December 1968, I came to the States to visit Kathy. And we had a nice breakfast on the 25th. Mrs. Gregory, which was Kathy's mother, was an excellent cook. Afterwards, we went to the living room and we looked at a beautiful multicolored Christmas tree while Mr. Gregory, which was Kathy's father, put on a record with Bing Crosby, blaring, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, while looking at all those bright lights going off and on the Christmas tree. He made a nice fire in the fireplace. Then we had little glasses with champagne and birthday cake because it was Jesus' birthday. Kathy remembered there were 1968 candles on the birthday cake, but that's not true. But we had a very nice birthday cake. And after that, the presents. My future mother-in-law took the presents from under the Christmas tree, said, hey, that's one for Doug, from Mom and Dad. Another one to Susan from Anne. Another package. Oh, that is for Kathy, from Mom and Dad. I was speechless. I was angry. I did not understand this whole thing. Because in Holland, all presents come from Sinterklaas. And here they said, who bought the present and from whom it was? I mean, I did not understand it. Now, yeah, little kids in Holland know that. I remember that I helped, quote unquote, my mother with in the kitchen, and she broke a cutting board, and she said, oh, no, I hope that Sinterklaas will bring me a new cutting board because I don't have one. And it was in the time of Sinterklaas, and lo and behold, she got a new cutting board from Sinterklaas. So I knew, whenever you want to have something and you're nice, then you will get it from Sinterklaas. Now, of course, when you're 6 or 7 or 8 years old, you realize there is not a filthy rich man who has billions of dollars to give presents all over the world. You realize that you have to become your own Sinterklaas, which is very nice. And if you're smart, you can figure out, of course, from whom you got a present. When it was an expensive present, it probably came from your father or mother or from a rich uncle. And when it was a very simple present, that came probably from your friends or from your sibling or something like that. I got a little, I love books. I got a booklet, December the 5th, 1958. I was at high school. We had a big party at school. We got presents, but I don't know from whom that came. It came from one of my class notes, but class members, but I don't know. It was Sinterklaas. A few years later, as I said, I love books. I got another one, Sinterklaas, 1961. And this one has a poem in it. And the handwriting of the poem is very familiar to me. It looks like the handwriting of my older sister. That doesn't matter. This book, Chesterton, The Wisdom of Father Brown, came from Sinterklaas. This is all introduction to my actual story. This is not a story. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There are two more things you have to know. First of all, my last name, Van der Horst, is in Holland with an H, Horst. Because most last names in Holland are Van, Vander, Vander, Van Den. If you would want to look me up in a telephone book, it would be impossible because almost the entire telephone book would have V's. So you have to look under H, Horst, Vander. If you want to find out Mr. Vanderbilt, not the V, you look under the B, Bilt, Vander. Another thing you might want to know about Holland is that we lived in a nice place, Hilversum, on the Radio Street number 74. And unbeknownst to us, there was also a woman who lived at number 73, but she was rich in my eyes because she had a car. And in 1947, I was 5 years old. I mean, nobody had a car except she had. And when friends came to visit her, they came in nice cars, so she had money. Okay, now you know enough about Holland to understand the story about Sinterklaas. It was 1947. I was 5 years old, and we sat in the living room having our evening meal. The living room was the only room in the house which was warm. The rest of the house was ice cold. After the meal, we sang some Sinterklaas songs, because you do that close to the time of Sinterklaas's birthday on the 5th, then you start to sing. So we sang, hey, you know all those familiar songs. Zie, de maan schijnt door de bomen, de makke staakt uw wild geraas. Het heerlijk avondje is gekomen, het avondje van Sinterklaas. But while we were singing, the doorbell rang. 6 o'clock in the evening, it's dark, cold. Who would be at the door? That could be Sinterklaas. My mother stand up, went out of the living room into the hall, opened the front door. And we kids listen, of course. Whether we heard something, it was nothing. The door got closed. My mother came back in the living room, and she had a box with her, a big box. And she said, it's very strange. I opened the front door, and there was nobody there. But this package was there. And it is for us. It says, Horst, Radio Street 74. And it's a picture of Sinterklaas. Oh, Sinterklaas. So my parents opened the box. Oh, I have to get my handkerchief because I start to drool when I think what it was. There was a marzipan pastry covered with chocolate and little fruits of cherries and strawberries and mandarin. I mean, it was a piece of art. And we shouted and oh, Sinterklaas, dankjewel, Sinterklaas, dankjewel. We failed to see the faces of my parents because they said to each other, who could have given that to us? We didn't have rich friends who would spend so much money for very expensive marzipan pastry. But since my father had a sweet tooth and my mother didn't want to break the tradition of the Sinterklaas, we ate it. And not all of it. We left a piece and we saved it for the following morning. We cut it in slices and we put it on bread. Wonderful. Now, years later, when I knew that I also was allowed to play Sinterklaas, my mother told what had happened the day after we had eaten that marzipan pastry. The confectioner came to the door and asked my mother whether we had received a package. And my mother said, yes, but it came from Sinterklaas and we ate it. It was very nice. Upon which the conditioner said, I'm sorry, but I made a mistake. I wrote down Horst, Radio Street 74, but it should have been Radio Street 73 to Mrs. Horst. Then my mother said, no, ja, it's gone, and I'm afraid, but you will have to make a new pastry because you cannot break the tradition of secret Sinterklaas. That's impossible. And now the moral of the story is that if you want to play Sinterklaas this year and accidentally deliver it to the wrong address, who knows? 75 years from now, long after you are dead and buried and nobody remembers your name, there might be an 80-year-old man who remembers you as having been the right Santa Claus. In 1977, I was manager of an apartment complex in Fairview. Subsidized housing, Section 8 housing, people paid according to their income, 30% of their income. I had 1, 2, or 3 bedroom apartments. One day I got a phone call from a social worker and asked whether we had a 2-bedroom apartment available because she had a young mother with 2 little children. Unfortunately, I only had 1-bedroom apartments available at that moment. Upon which the social worker said, "Oh, that doesn't matter. They're in desperate need of an apartment, and if I don't get something tonight, they will have to sleep out on the street. And she is a very nice woman, and the kids are very nice." Now yeah, to make a long story short, the social worker brought the people over to the complex. I still remember the social worker with a pile of papers under her arm, the young mother, perhaps early 20s, dark circles under her eyes, with a small suitcase. And 2 little kids, a 5-year-old daughter and a 3, 4-year-old son. Now we did all kinds of paperwork and checking references and so, and everything turned out to be okay. So I showed them the 1-bedroom apartment. I still remember the young mother sitting on the floor of the bedroom, patting the carpet and saying, "Oh, this is so nice and it is so soft. I don't even need a mattress. I can sleep right on the floor." Upon which the social worker said, "Oh, that won't do. I will still organize mattress and I will also bring some kitchen utensils." Social worker goes away, undoubtedly to another client. I went back to the apartment to show the woman how to operate in the appliances. The young woman sat again in the bedroom on the floor and had opened the little suitcase. And on top of it were some cut-out photos from National Geographic. And she put them on the wall with some text that she had with her. And she said, "Isn't that not nice? I feel at home here." I was reminded of that when the following year we went tent camping in the Wallalas. Some of you might remember my tent story, and very embarrassing in the Wallalas. It was not the first, and it was not the second, but it was the 3rd time that I forgot to bring my tent poles. And sleeping in a tent without tent poles, it does not work. So we spent quite some money that first night of our 3-week vacation in a rather expensive resort next to the campground. As a matter of fact, we spent almost all our vacation money. And so the following morning, we went to Joseph and we bought ourselves a very cheap small tent. And we told each other, we will not be able to take a little breather in a motel and get freshened up. We will not be able to eat out. We didn't even have money to pay for state campground fees. We only could stay in national forest campgrounds. They are cheaper, simpler. Some of them don't even have running water. But they always have, fortunately, an outhouse. By the way, in Holland we call an outhouse a poepdoos. Guess what that means? As it happened, it was around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and we always like to camp in September. And the days are a little bit shorter, but it's nice and quiet. And there was nobody else in the campground, which was nice. Eh? We are both introverts, so we don't like all those people, so it's nice and quiet. I set up the small tent. Kathy made a little bit of dinner. And I made a very small campfire. We were very, very tired. And by that time, it was around 8, 9 o'clock, and it really started getting dark. Although there was a full moon, but we couldn't see the moon because of all the trees around us. And then we noticed a light ribbon of light shimmering. And it sounded a little rumble sound of, it sounded very strange. And I thought, this cannot be a freeway. And so when you're in nowhere, in a freeway far away, that sometimes sounds, the background, you think that must be the freeway. And that couldn't have been, because we were far away from everybody. We were in the middle of nowhere. And then we suddenly heard some moaning sound. It sounded like a woman was in pain. And I told Kathy, that's nonsense. It cannot be. Well, let's check that light, that ribbon of light. There has to be something. So I made sure that the campfire was out. We walked to the end of the campground, and there was a clearing, and we could see the sky and a nice full moon. And then we noticed there was a stream meandering through the forest, and that murmured a blub, 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 and that was the sound we heard. That seemed to sound like the murmuring of that sounded like first we thought it was the freeway, but it's now obvious it was the water running. So we were relieved to see that. And on the way back to the campground, to the campsite, we saw a tree had fallen and branches were rubbing against each other, and the vibration sounded like a woman in pain. And when we were at the campsite, although we knew what the sounds were, it still sounded rather creepy. And I thought that our ancestors, at that time of the night, werewolves and wolves and witches and evil spirits. I mean, it was really scary. And it was dark. So I went to the car and tried to find some light. And now I have to put this thing down. I had to do that only in the dark. Here I have a little bit of light, but there it was really dark. It was a little bit difficult to do that. And so I found this emergency candle, and I hang it on I found this candle and I lit it, hang it on a tree, and although those creepy sounds still tried to do their best to scare us, that little light changed everything. It changed the mood. And we felt safe. And then I reminded that tenant of mine who had created a home by hanging up some photos cut out of a National Geographic. And ever since that time camping in the Wallamas, I decided that I always should have a candlelight burning in my mind the rest of my life. Thank you. Some years ago, my doctor did some surgery on my hand, and in the night I had to wear a splint. I hate that thing. Inconvenient, black wood, ugly. But it reminded me of a trip Kathy and I took in '71. I showed her Holland, and we went to a place where some friends of mine lived, and a place called Sertogenbos. It's the place where the famous Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch lived. And there's also the St. John's Cathedral. Now I knew that the cathedral was being renovated, and I hoped that everything would be ready. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So when we approached the cathedral, we could not see the gargoyles and the flying buttresses because everything was covered with all those metal pipes, the scaffold. Fortunately, we could still go inside the building. And we had mixed feelings about that actually, because on one hand it was a place of worship, beauty. At the same time, the workmen were still working there. There were hammers, hammering her hearing, and painters, drop cloths and ladders and dust and so. But I had to console myself by saying, in a few weeks everything will be fine and beautiful. And that's the same thing with my splints. And who knows? I have lots of splints and casts and scaffolds in my life. They are necessary. They are inconvenient, they're ugly, but they keep me on the straight and narrow, and eventually I can get rid of those things. And I hope that when I step out of the time, that my final scaffold will be broken down. Now, Kathy and I, we saw that cathedral, and she wrote a song about it, and she would like to share that with you at this moment.
chairs are set with cushioning. Special lights and signs will help you see. Translations in folders will explain in full. Symbols, colors, dates, and history. The saints are staring blankly from their pedestals. The marble angels kneel but never pray. That lonely figure on a frame of wood doesn't have a single word to say. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it cold? The echoes of our footsteps sound terribly old. Many people come to visit God's museum. Some of them still leave a candle there. That was a song I really wanted to resurrect. And I had to use the guitar to do it. And
This will be a Christmas story. I tell you that because I won't say anything about kneeling or praying or singing angels. I will not say anything about baby Jesus and shepherds. And yet, I think it is a Christmas story. Sometimes people ask me, how do you start a story? What kind of ideas do you have? How does it work? And I think they're always disappointed when I say, I don't know. I scribble some thoughts down on a little notebook, events I witnessed, some people I've met, and then months or years later I try to decipher what I have scribbled down, and eventually I put some events together, and then it is a story. I would like to share with you tonight 4 of those little scribbles, those little events. And they will coalesce into a Christmas story. The first event, some of you might remember that I worked in Switzerland and visited some friends who had a 9-year-old daughter. When I saw her lying on the couch, of course I knew something was wrong. She was swaddled in clothing and lying there doing nothing. She had no arms, no legs. Her mother, when she was pregnant, had used thalidomide. It caused birth defects. And for 9 years, those parents had loved that child. The child could not move, could not speak, could not react to anything. And yet, 60 years after I saw those eyes, I still remember those eyes. They were like windows to another world. A second event. That same year I traveled through Germany and I visited a church. The town had been bombed during the Second World War, and They had restored the church, but there was a statue of Christ had fallen down and the hands were broken off. And some parishioners said they wanted to restore the statue again. Then other people said, no, we should keep the statue. And there was a sign on the pedestal saying, I have no hands but your hands. The third episode. I studied theology, and I had to learn to read Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics and Paul Tillich's Systematic Theology. I know about some of God's might and power, his wisdom, God, the creator of heaven and earth. I also had to read books by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the one who went back to Nazi Germany and protested against Hitler. And he was executed shortly before the end of the Second World War. And in one of his books he wrote, only the suffering God can help. The fourth episode happened a few months ago. I watched a video on YouTube about Nick Vujicic. He was born in Australia and lives now with his wife and children in the LA area. And he is a motivational speaker. And I saw him speaking in the front of hundreds of high school kids. Now, high school kids are difficult to satisfy, to please. They were spellbound. He shared fun things about himself. He teased himself. He shared also sad things. Kids were laughing, and other times they were crying. He told them that he was 10 years old, and kids teased him and bullied him, and he wanted to end it once and for all. He spoke their language. He knew about peer pressure and eating disorders and sex and drugs. But at the end of his speech, if he talked for hundreds of those students, he said that he didn't care what people look like, whether they fat or had an eating disorder, whether they had pimples or were popular or not. He didn't care. He loved them the way they were. And he wanted to give each of them a hug. And after his talk, all those students stood in line to get a hug from him. Actually, that's not quite correct, because they went to give him a hug, because Nick was born without arms and legs. He had stood on a table in front of them and shared with them the pain of trying to be like the others. But he never could do that. The others had arms and legs, and he didn't. He had shared with them how he visited a group of people, and there was a woman with a 2.5-year-old toddler, a girl. And the girl walks towards him, sees him, and stops, because she had never seen an adult without arms and legs, who was only also 3 feet tall. And slowly the toddler walks towards Nick, and when she reaches him, stands right in front of him, she hides her arms and puts her head on his shoulder. And I think that is also the message of Christmas. The Holy One, blessed be her name, sometimes hides her hands from us. But at Christmas, she uncovers her face and puts her head on our shoulder. something different. The title is Tecumseh's Curse. You might say, a curse? That's impossible in a church. No. But my favorite uncle always said, God rather listens to an honest curse than a fake prayer. Ha! Yes, do I hear an amen? An amen, yes. So Tecumseh's curse. In '74, when Kathy and I came back from Cameroon, we moved to West Lafayette, Tippecanoe County, Indiana. We thought we might find some job there. Turned out to be, was not very successful. I remember walking every day, crossing the Wabash River into downtown West Lafayette to the unemployment office. Finally, they had something for me. It was an older gentleman, actually an older man, it was not a gentleman, an older man who was a kind of handyman, and he fixed all kinds of things. And he was interested in me. He was married, but he had no children, and he actually wanted to have somebody who could take over the business. I wasn't interested, but it was nice to know. Actually, I learned a lot from him. I hang sheetrock, I fix faucets, pulled toilets, clipped hedges, I mean, all kinds of stuff that later on, when I worked for the Mennonite Voluntary Service here in Portland, came quite handy. But as you know, when you work with somebody, eventually you, although he was a nice guy, you also get his shadow side. And he had some of them. One of them, he was an alcoholic. He loved to drink his beer. One day he ran out of some tools and he had to go back to his workshop. And he said, "No, let's come get in the jar in the truck and let's go to home." So we went to his home and he said, "Wait, sit in the living room, sit on the couch, and I'll find whatever I need." I sit on the couch and I felt something poking in my back, and I looked at it. It was a six-pack behind the pillows. And then my boss entered the room and he saw me. He said, "Yeah, this is my wife. She's a Jehovah's Witness, and she doesn't like me drinking, so she always hides the beer. But I know all the hiding places." That's the first place I look, behind the pillows on the couch. I found them under the couch, in the hamper, in the bathroom. I mean, any place he puts them, I find it. But he was still a nice guy, actually, I think. Sometimes after work, we would go to I know the name. The name was called Bear and Ball. And it was a kind of joint where scantily clad ladies served us beer. And he drank that beer. And one time he whispered to me, "Do you know about Tecumseh's curse?" Now, there seemed to be a Tecumseh curse. You can look it up in Google. In 1811, there was a big battle of Tippecanoe, and Chief Tecumseh, the tribal head of the Shawnees, lost the battle. And the legend goes that Tecumseh was so mad, he said, "Any president who will be elected in a year that ends with a 0 will die in office." Perhaps because my boss drank too much beer, I do not know, but the version I heard from him was that after the battle of Tippecanoe, Tecumseh was so mad that he said, "Any white man who settles in Tippecanoe County will never be able to leave the county. You're stuck there forever." It probably gave him justification for him to stay put in West Lafayette and not to go to other places. That the curse was not that powerful is proved. I'm here, and that happened all 50 years ago, and I have no wish to go back to Tippecanoe County. It happened 50 years ago, and the man was probably 60 when I met him, so by now he must have gone to the eternal hunting grounds, where he probably must have met Chief Tecumseh and President Harrison. Colonel Harrison fought in the Battle of Tippecanoe against Tecumseh. The same guy. And Harrison was elected to become the 9th president of the United States of America. And 30 days after the inauguration, he died in office. Exactly according to Tecumseh curse. But I believe that when my boss went to the eternal hunting grounds, he must have met Chief Tecumseh and President Harrison. And that they sat around a fire, drinking beer or nectar, I don't know, smoking a peace pipe at the banks of the New Wabash River in New Tippecanoe County in the heavenly state of Native Americana. To think about that, eh?
When I decided to sing this old hymn version of the 23rd Psalm, I did a little research into shepherding during biblical times. And I learned that shepherds could be both men and women. The man would be the sheep herder, and he would be responsible for taking the decision to go to a pasture. He would decide where they would put the sheep. He would protect them from thieves and predators. He treated illnesses and took them to market or looked for the lost. A shepherdess, on the other hand, could start at the age of 8 or 10 years old. And she would be responsible for the daily taking the sheep out into the pasture, for staying with them, for bringing them to water, and then bringing them back to an enclosure at night for safety. So I invite you, when you listen to the 23rd Psalm again, to think of shepherding as something that we all can do for each other. And these images of both male and female shepherds show us God in all his caring qualities. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie in pastures green. He leadeth me the quiet waters by. My soul he doth restore again, and me to walk doth make within the paths of righteousness, in for his own name's sake. Yea, though I walk through death's dark vale, yet will I fear no ill, for staff me comfort still. Goodness and mercy all my life shall surely follow me, and in God's house forevermore. My dwelling place shall be.
If I were to ask you, what is your okay, this was a commercial only. Aha. I thought that I had a big mouth, but no, you don't see it. It keeps me humble. It keeps me humble. Yeah. Anyway, in Berlin, I stepped in the empty train compartment, which was fine with me. I sat in the corner in the window and I read my book. It was, I remember, Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities. And I looked outside of the window once in a while and I read the book. Nobody entered my compartment whenever the train stopped a couple of times. And except in, I think it was Minden, Westfalen, when two men entered my compartment. And we said, no, guten Abend. It was German, so I mean, we should speak German to each other. But when the train left Minden, the men started to talk with each other. It was in Dutch, but I could not quite understand everything. So I said, excuse me, gentlemen, but I'm also from Holland, and you're from Holland, but what kind of dialect are you speaking? I don't quite understand everything. Oh, that is Veluws. We live in Putten. And I said, Putten, I have been there. I was a teenager, and there is a memorial site there with a very nice statue. And then one of the men said, yeah, that we call that the woman of Putten. It reminds me of the man who died during the war. We were born in the beginning of the war. We were born in the beginning of the war, and our father is died in Nazi Germany. And whenever we see that statue, it reminds us of our father. And then I remembered the first time I had seen that statue. And I don't quite remember what happened, but I traveled back in time when I was around 16 years old, and I had my favorite uncle who had a car, and he sometimes visited us. And when he left, before he left, he said, "Franz, do you want to spend the summer vacation at our house in Heerde?" I had done that the previous year, and it was probably a nice way for me to get out of the house, and it was cheap vacation for me, and so I said, "Sure, it would be nice." And then I knew I could play with my cousins and go swimming, riding a bike, and perhaps I could get a ride with my uncle. So I said, "Yes, nice, it would be very fine, uncle." But he said, "You go by bike, stop in Putten. There is a memorial site, and there is a very nice statue. And I haven't seen it yet. I would like you to see it, and you can tell me all about it." Now, he was my favorite uncle, so of course I said, "Yes, I will do that. I will tell you all about that statue." But then he said, "You know what happened in Putten?" And then I remembered that at grade school I had something learned about the history, but I didn't want to bring it up in my mind. I was ashamed probably, I don't know. Anyway, at the beginning of vacation, I was ready to go to visit my uncle and my aunt and my 3 cousins in Heerde. And I was ready to go on my iron horse. An iron horse in Holland is the bike. It's not that steam engine in Holland, in America, it's a bicycle. And my bike bags were filled with clean underwear, and a box with chocolate for my aunt, and a box with cigars for my uncle, and off I went. It was early in the morning, 6, 7 o'clock. The surroundings of Hilversum are very pretty, fields of heather, forests, and a little bit further up the meadows around the Eem River, very pretty. And of course, I didn't follow major roads. In Holland you have a lot of bicycle paths meandering through the open field, so I really could feel part of nature. It was very pretty. And after I went through the fields of heather and the forest, I reached the meadowlands, farmland. There's a nice smell of freshly cut grass and cow manure, and some farmhouses still with thatched roofs. I could hear some mourning doves, and I saw a meadow lark. It was all really pretty. The sun was still low on the horizon. Blue sky, few white clouds. And when I went over the river Rhine, the Eem, more meadows, lots of cows who looked at me as if they never had seen a 16-year-old boy riding a bike. Sometimes I met somebody who came from the opposite direction, and I said, "Morgen!" And then they said, "Morgen!" That's very pretty. But then slowly, after an hour or 2 riding my bike, the landscape changes slightly. In the beginning, very, very slowly. No more canals, no more meadows, more grass, tall grass, shrubs. The smell changes, and they smell pine trees. It's the beginning of the Hoge Veluwe, the largest nature conserve in Holland. And the bicycle path is beautiful. I'm really in my element. And at a junction where 2 bicycle paths cross each other, there is a little road sign. We call it a paddenstoel, a toadstool, a mushroom, on which is written down how many kilometers it is to the nearest village. And there is one. It says Putten. So instead of going north, straight ahead, I go left, going to the west, to Putten. It's perhaps only 5 or 6 kilometers. I could see the outline of the little village. I could see also a tower, which is handy because I knew that the memorial site was next to the church. To be honest, I was disappointed in the memorial site. I didn't expect to see much beauty in the church, a brick building for simple, very conservative Christians. Then a hedge, and in front of the hedge, the memorial site. Little squares, neatly trimmed hedges, hundreds of them. And at the other end, a statue. In my memory, it's life-size. It's a woman dressed in local custom with a funny-looking bonnet and a long-sleeve blouse, an apron and a long skirt, and in her right hand she holds a handkerchief, and she looks over at a memorial site with all those squares and a church. The church where the man spent the last night in Putten. And then I remember what I had learned at grade school, that what I didn't want to remember when my uncle asked me whether I knew about Putten. I sit down, look at the church, and the site, and the woman, that statue. And then I remember, on September the 30th, 1944, the Dutch underground decided to ambush a Nazi officer's car. Things go wrong. The Nazis are very, very angry. They want to take revenge. In a few hours, they have gotten lots of Nazi soldiers who surround Putten, and they order all the men between 18 and 50 years to get into the church. The men cannot go anywhere. There are soldiers outside the village. There are soldiers around the church. There are soldiers on the balcony with a machine gun aimed at the sanctuary downstairs. They have no place to go. They have to spend the whole night. They are not allowed to go to the bathroom. The following morning, October the 2nd, the women of the village are ordered to bring food to the men in the church. And then they start to sing. The men want to sing. It's not what you do in a church, you sing. They sing Psalm 84. They are very conservative Christians. They only sing psalms. And they only sing psalms in whole notes. There is no rhythm in it. After the singing of 3 verses, they're ordered to go to the train station. They have to cross a forested area, and they are afraid they will be executed there. But they reach the train station, and from there they are transported to Amersfoort, and from there a few days later to Nazi Germany. As soon as the men have left the village, the women are ordered to leave the village. And they burn 110 houses. And after the war, only very few people returned from Nazi Germany. And I've counted all those squares at the memorial site. There are 660. And then I remember what I learned at grade school. Putten is the place without husbands, without fathers, without uncles. Then suddenly I realize time has flown by. The sky, the beautiful sky is covered with clouds. It's getting a little bit cold and I'm hungry. I had planned to have my lunch there, but I thought it would be sacrilege to have a nice lunch at a place which symbolizes so much suffering. So I take my bike and walk a few blocks further up and I sit down and finish my lunch. And by that time it starts to rain. And that's nothing uncommon in Holland. Actually, there are only two weather forecasts in Holland. One says showers with a chance of sunshine, and the other says sunshine with a chance of showers. But I'm well prepared. I have a poncho draped over my handlebars, and off I go, the same way I came. And at the junction, I go to the left, north, towards Heerde. And there is a downpour. It gets terrible. The water drips on my back. My glasses are steamed up. The path gets also a little bit muddy and it splashes up on my legs. And I feel miserable. And I think, I should not have spent all that time looking at that statue. I could have been with my aunt and uncle. I could have played the Monopoly with my cousins or something like that. Terrible. And I have a one-speed bike. So it was really hard work. And then, of course, the wind picks up and it comes from the north and I have right straight into the rain. Terrible. I follow a Forest Service road. And just like all other forest roads in the world, they are muddy and not paved and they are seldom used. And then I see through the rain two spots of light. A car comes towards me. And sometimes I don't see the lights because the car is zigzagging. And I think, it has to be a game warden or a Forest Service person in a truck or something like that. Who in the world will drive a car in this kind of weather on this road? My bicycle path is fine, that road is terrible. Then I realize it is a passenger car, an Opel. And the lights go off and on. He must have seen me and he started to wave because I see the license plate. UP3471. That is the license plate of my uncle. I stop my bike. I look back. The car has stopped. The head of my uncle appears and shouts, Franz, do you want to have a ride? Oh, by golly, I was so happy. I could have kissed the guy. We put the poncho and the bike bags in the back of the seat and somehow we managed to put the bike in the trunk. And my uncle in the meantime, of course, also is wet and his water drips from his Rubenesque beard on his vest. But he is happy and he smiles and I sit in the front next to him. I'm so happy. With a difficult time, he turns around the car and off he go. And the windshield wiper tries his best to keep the windshield clean. And the rain is pouring down and I feel miserable, but I'm happy. My uncle loves me. He is so rich. He's an architect and he has his own car. And he loves me so much that he came to pick me up. And his car is so wonderful. Do you know, there is a light in the ceiling, and when you turn it on, you can read the map. Very nice. And he has a built-in radio, not the one with knobs, no. You press button, that's much easier. And Holland has 2 radio stations, Hilversum 1 and Hilversum 2. And you press a button and you can listen to the radio. And with luck, you press a 3rd button and then you can hear, this is the BBC Home Service, here's the news. Oh, wonderful. And there is a cigarette lighter. You press that button and it pops out after a little while and then It's red hot. Now, I don't smoke, but you can start a fire with that. And when you are lost, you don't know where you are, you can make a fire and can send out smoke signals. What the Indians do in America. And there is a button, a knob. You turn it. And then a warm air blows right at you. And you don't have to pay anything for it. This is a part of the car. It's built in. Doesn't cost you anything. And I feel so blessed and thankful. And all those memories come back to me when I hear that those two men sitting opposite me in the train compartment came from Putten. And I don't know what to say. Putten. Place without husbands and wives and sons and fathers and no uncles. And so I told them the story I told just you. And then there's a long silence. We can only hear the rhythmic cadence of the wheels on the car, on the rails. And then finally one of the brothers says, you spent so much time looking at the woman of Putten, that statue, that you got caught in a rainstorm. And your uncle, who loved you very much, picked you up in his car, where it was very dry and nice and warm, and you felt safe and loved by your uncle. Every day, we see that statue, the woman of Putten. And every day, it reminds us of our father and all those other men who never came back to Putten. But now, that statue reminds us also of your uncle. Thank you for sharing that story with us. In Arnhem, the train stopped, and the men have to go transfer to another train, a local train which will bring them to Putten. We stand up and we shake hands. We wish each other the best. I still see them walking over the platform to the waiting train that will bring them to Putten. My train continues to answer them. I will never see those men again. But I will never forget. I will never forget. Thank you.
This is the last song. We've gone way over, but thank you for all staying around. This is by way of a prayer, and it's a prayer of 3 words in Latin. Usually it is sung as a round, which is like row, row, row your boat. It has 3 different portions, but we're not going to make you sing. I'm just going to do it. The Latin is Dona nobis pacem, and it translates to give us peace. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis
pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem, pacem, dona nobis pacem.
Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming.